Once our barn find was back on its wheels, it became possible to clean it from the mud and dirt that had been accumulated on the bottom and to inspect it more thoroughly. After the inspection, it turned out that the chassis is exceptionally well preserved without any signs of corrosion. This car had never been driven in winter conditions or been involved in any accidents. This further fueled my desire to restore this vehicle. I made a list of things that needed to be repaired or replaced, as well as all additional options to be added during the restoration process. Now let's begin with disassembly of the interior. I removed the rear and side panels to replace the faulty antenna amplifier. The motors holding the rear seat headrests are also missing. It's time to remove the front seats, and here you will notice something that I didn't quite understand at that moment, but I'll explain it shortly. I took out the floor carpets. Do you like my new Recaro Sport seat? The trim under the rear window needs a little refreshing. Here it turned out that they had taken the CD changer, cut its cables and intentionally removed the fuses along with their sockets. It appears that they need to access the cable bundle under the front windshield, much like I did when I removed everything, including the dashboard and HVAC unit. This was because, besides removing the AMG seats, they had also dismantled all of this to extract the wiring harness for the seat heating and ventilation system. When I initially captured the images of the floor, I wasn't aware that the wiring harness was missing. However, you can now see that in Project 13 there are only 3 cable bundles, the conductive severed, whereas in Project Phoenix there are 4 secured with zip ties. I had to install a replacement cable bundle to make the climate seats functional. This is how far the water line reached in the interior. To clean up this mess, I removed all the floor plugs and used water and cleaning solution to wash the interior body of the car. After that, I dismantled the main cable harness and began adding the additional cable harnesses for the supplementary features like neck probe, rear seat heating, and these are the donor seats from which I'll extract the seat heater elements. This is the air pump for dynamic seats and air reservoir, the tubes and the electrical wiring that need to be added. I created these additional openings in the pump housing to improve cooling. I also added the missing ESP module, but communication with the SBC system is still not working. However, everything in the front fuse box seems as it has been exposed to a rain for a long time. It needs to be removed and cleaned. Next came the addition of the Stronic system, an iguanometer for the alarm system, an alarm system Siren, and the installation of additional cable looms were installed. I replaced the front hood watch with an opening sensor. The first Siren was severely damaged due to battery leakage, so I've had to replace it with another one and replaced the batteries. Afterward, I've added a winter package with a thermostat controlled heater which warms the windshield washer reservoir and heated hoses and washer nozzles. Then I organized the cables in the trunk. In fact, it turned out to be easier than expected. The yellow, blue and red markings acted as guides, and by arranging the cable bundles according to their colors, everything fell into place. Conversion from pre-facelift left tail light to post-facelift right tail light. The car originally had an analog TV tuner that was missing. I've decided to retrofit a digital TV tuner. The only modification needed is to rearrange the pins of the 4-pin connector into 8-pin connector. A few more of the missing modules were added. I also retrofitted automatic trunk opening and closing, and here is the final result. Everything is now arranged, organized and connected. The only missing is a factory TPMS installation, for which I am actively searching. Further, cable and hose arranging is done inside the cabin. The missing SRS crash sensor has been added too. The disassembling process of the overhead control panel for black painting. I started removing all the damaged front suspension components and sent the leaking steering rack for a repair. Here are the new control arms, but I've decided to change their design a bit. Instead of rubber bushings, I opted for spherical bearing bushings to achieve a more stable geometry and better steering response. While the late operator was working on the front control arms, I've decided to check what's happening under the front hood. To my surprise, the radiator was completely clogged with debris. It was so clogged that not even light could pass through the fins. On top of that, I discovered that the radiator cooling fan wasn't working and the coolant reservoir cap couldn't maintain pressure and the coolant starts boiling. It's likely that the engine was overheated. I've decided to continue with this assembly process. I removed the front axle beam to access the oil pan, which allowed me to replace the O-ring of the oil pump suction pipe. This allows me to examine the engine internals condition after 13 years of stay. When I took off the oil pan, I was surprised. The crankshaft bearing surfaces were rusted, the connecting rods had suffered from corrosion, and even the timing chains displayed evidence of rust damage. I removed several connecting rod bearings to be able to access the extent of the rust damage. However, I observed that the rust corrosion had penetrated into the working area of the bearings. I used sandpaper to clean the surface, only to discover that the rust had deeply affected the crankshaft, making it unusable. I realized that this engine requires a significant overhaul if it's possible. Considering the potential overheating in the past, things don't look very promising. What should I do? Should I look for another engine, or should I take on the challenge of performing a major repair of the mighty AMG M113K engine?